listeners. Good evening to the viewers and listeners of this week in interview. This is your host, Anthony Drago, and we are here on a Wednesday as we usually are. And we are looking to bring you some interesting information, entertaining, informative, and hopefully spur you to take some action. So, welcome, welcome. Let's share the live. Let people know that this week in interview is live. Um, you know, take up some time, text your friends, invite 5 people, tell them to join us because the information we have is just tremendous and we would like to share it far and wide. If you're listening to us from Dominica, RVR Jams, radio on DigiPlay Channel 59 carries this week in interview live. So welcome. And I hope you're having a great time. I don't know what the weather is like. I saw there's a tropical storm that's on the east coast of the US, but I didn't hear anything about that on the islands. I hope you're having great weather. And of course, in the Toronto market, Radio SBE Online also carries this week in interview live, primarily Haitian centered population in the Toronto area. So good evening to you. To my regular listeners who come every Wednesday night to spend this time with us, welcome. I always appreciate you coming. And tonight is the first time that you listen to this weekend interview. Welcome. I hope you like what you hear sufficiently that you too will become a regular viewer and listener to this week in interview. So this week we're talking about two things that's very, very close to my heart, literally. Dominica, the land of my birth, and coffee. Coffee and I have such a good relationship that sometimes it makes my heart beat faster. But that's what we're talking about tonight. So go refresh your drink, grab your water, grab something stronger if you need it. Text your friends, let them know this weekend's interview is live, and we'll be right back. All right, so we're back. I hope you had a chance to get your glass of water, your beverage, whatever it is, well, your cup of coffee. Um, do you have coffee from Dominica? Do you remember our times in Dominica drinking coffee? I hope you had a chance to freshen your drink. Tonight we are going to be talking to Mr. Ezra Remer. He is the executive director of Dominica Coffee Revitalization Initiative, and we are talking coffee. Um, those of us who grew up, especially in the countryside, will have that intimate relationship with coffee and cocoa, where almost every yard had a coffee tree and a cocoa tree, and you would pick your coffee beans and you would process them, and your parents would be making coffee. Right now we see that coffee has gone global, and coffee is a multi-billion, probably even $1 trillion industry. We see the mix of Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, uh, and you would think that coffee is vested, it resides in that aspect of our lives. But I'm telling you, as a young kid growing up in a small village in a small island in the Caribbean, coffee was an integral part of our life. Coffee was just right there, always. And so much so that I can go to a coffee plantation now and do every step there is in the processing of coffee, from picking it from the tree all the way to getting it into your cup, because we just grew up doing it as a natural activity. Before I bring in my guests, I want to just say hello to all the folks of African American descent. Today is Juneteenth. That's an important date in the lives of African American because it signifies the I guess the very end of slavery in the U.S. There's a story that slavery was abolished, but the news took a long time to get to all the corners of the U.S. And there was this place in Texas that people were still enslaved, and then the news arrived to them, and they immediately dropped their tools and took to the streets celebrating. And that happened on the 19th of June, and so therefore they celebrate Juneteenth. And it has come a long way because right now it's recognized as a federal holiday and so on. So I don't know if it's to say happy Juneteenth for well, but however you mark that day, I want to recognize it with you. All right. So we've spent a lot of time with the intro. I'm not going to spend any more time because the topic tonight has me extremely excited. It's about two things that I care about quite a lot: Dominica and coffee. And so my guest tonight on this weekend interview is a gentleman by the name of Ezra Remer. Ezra is not a Dominican by birth. Good night, Ezra. He's not Dominican by birth. As from what I understand, he grew up in Florida, but he knew of Dominica even as a child. He learned about Dominica from his grandmother, and he'll give us his own story in more detail. And he also developed a loving for coffee. And so when Hurricane Maria devastated Dominica in 2017, and he heard of the news, he was devastated and wanted to see how what could he do to really make a difference, to contribute to the revival of the people and to ease their suffering. And so he got the idea that he can help them to revitalize the coffee industry. And so he went into that, no small feat. And here we are 7 years later, and he has made a lot of strides. He's elbow deep into it now. And we're going to learn what he has done, what the status of the coffee industry in Dominica is now, if there is a coffee industry to think about, or if that is being developed. And let's just learn a lot more about this young man who seem to love Dominica as much as we who were actually born and grew up there. So, Ezra, it's a very much of a pleasure to have you as my guest on this weekend interview tonight. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
Yes, and you know, we're here tonight because I read a story that was run on you in a newspaper. Somebody sent it to me. It was highlighting some of the work that you were doing in Dominica, and immediately, impulsively, I sent it to our team and I said, I want to get this guy on the show. We have to talk to him. Um, and we made contact with a few people, and then Father Coffee was the one who came up with your contact. And that same evening, that very same evening, we spoke, and you immediately agreed to come on. So I want to thank you. It seems like you're a very busy person. I want to thank you for making the time to come on the program.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yeah, no, I called you. I had just landed in Dominica, actually. So I was calling you from Rosalie at that time on the first night that I was on
You-
island.
all right, so it was all that happened in one night. Look, but I want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself. Take some time and just develop the story for us. How you became aware of Dominica. What was your relationship with Dominica? What memories you have of Dominica? And if I'm correct, and it's through your grandmother, what memories you and your grandmother share of Dominica? And then and then we can talk about how coffee became part of that.
Definitely. Yeah. So it is a funny roundabout story of how I got involved in Dominica. I was always interested in islands, the Caribbean. As you said, my step grandmother was a travel writer for the New York Times, Fran Marcus. And she understood that passion I had. And I remember as a gift, as when I was young, I have the book right here, this coffee
Oh,
table
I
book.
remember that book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful book. I just would study the pages, read the history. I became almost obsessive over it. So from that moment on, I was just like, I'll visit Dominica one day. That's a dream of mine. It just was such a beautiful place through the stories that were told and the pictures and all of those things. And so that was just always in the back of my mind. And, I grew up actually in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Mm.
So we went through Hurricane Katrina. That was most of my childhood was in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina there. And so I always had, this connection to the Caribbean. We consider ourselves the northernmost city in the Caribbean.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah, a lot of similarities. We were talking before the
Hmm.
show. Creole cultures, food, both the way we eat, talk, think, act. There's a lot of similarities. Dominica feels a lot like home since then. So there's always that connection there. But it wasn't until, as you said, Hurricane Maria, and watching the devastation unfold while I was a undergrad at the University of Miami. That was my time in Florida. That I began to see, there's so much struggle going on right now and not a lot of assistance. And it brought me back to my childhood growing up in New Orleans after Hurricane Hurricane Katrina there, and I just wanted to do what I could to help out. So I had never been to the island before that. I didn't have any contacts on the island. I found a few charities that were starting to, do things like bringing over food and clothes and things like that. But I soon realized from my own experiences that the immediate response is one thing, but the long term recovery process is another thing.
Right.
Uh, so that's what drew me back to Dominica after my original experience as a kid, just reading the book and becoming obsessed as a child.
Wow, that's a tremendous story. So you had never been to Dominica before Hurricane Maria,
No, I had never been. I'd only been to a few places in the Caribbean before, but I'd never
right?
been to Dominica specifically. Yeah.
Mm. But you learned about Dominica from reading about Dominica from your grandmother visited there, I guess, a few times. Is that what your step grandmother?
Yeah, she was a travel writer, so she traveled through the Caribbean, wrote about the Caribbean, and she fell in love with Dominica specifically. She said it was an island like no other in the region, and so she always encouraged me. She understood I had a love for nature, kind of the raw nature and expression that you see in Dominica, and she always encouraged me to visit one day. And so, it never was a top of the list, is always like one day I'll get there. But then after
Hmm.
the hurricane, that became, a focus of mine is getting there and assisting in whatever way I could.
Okay. So then you heard about the hurricane. How soon after the hurricane did you go there, and how did you get there?
Yeah, so it started off then with like the immediate long-term vision. And so I had been working in coffee for a little bit in the industry broadly. As a barista, I became more interested in coffee cultivation and how that can be used for sustainable development goals. Um, and so I started actually first by just reaching out to nonprofit individuals, people who work in that space in Dominica, to see if this was something of interest. And it was here that I found the co-founder and the Dominican director of our nonprofit, Mr. Michael Saverin, who had previously been working with the Tauntaun Village Development Corporation. Now he works for the Green Climate Fund as well. And he said, "Yeah, my grandfather grew coffee. This is something we're interested in. There's opportunity here. How about you come and we'll meet up and we'll get to see what the options are if there's more buy-in from the broader community." So through a grant through the University of Miami, where I was an undergraduate at the time, I got our first grant to go over. This would be, I believe, June or July of 2018. So it was less than a year after the hurricane, but it was just at the moment where flights started up back again.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
there was some capacity to come back because well, there's oftentimes I see this happen after a lot of disasters, unfortunately, around the world. There's a want for people to come and help and do what they can, but also we have to realize that there's limited resources, especially on a small island. So just coming and being more mouths to feed, more bodies for places to sleep when most people on the island didn't have roofs over their head was a difficult proposition. So we waited until the summer succeeding the hurricane to come, and things by no means were back up and running. Every
No,
time,
no.
right? Every time I'm back in Dominica, I'm always, so impressed by how quickly things have recovered. I remember it was just so brown and gray,
Mhm,
especially in the
mhm.
forest when we came back, like toothpicks of trees in areas where they used to be just lush forests. But then each year you see more and more green come back. First, it's the vines, and we were worried that would overtake the trees. Then you start to see the first leaves, and then more, and then more. And then, I know that things aren't fully back to where they were even 7 years on, but now the forest feels like a forest. Um, and things are slowly making their way back up since then. So it's a testimony to both the will of nature, but the will of the people of Dominica as well, how much things have recovered since then.
Yeah, it's amazing. I remember seeing the photos after the hurricane, and it's like the trees, the bark was peeled off the trees. This is bare wood, and you thought that most of those trees were going to die, but it seems like a lot of the trees. Because when I see the photos, it's not grass and shrub. Actually, trees seem to have recovered quickly. So
Definitely.
tell us about coffee, your relationship to coffee. How did that start, and what does your whole involvement in coffee?
Yeah, it's hard. We're talking about the history of Dominicans and their attachment to coffee on the island. And in many ways, New Orleans has that same history. Have historically been the largest coffee port in the United States. I believe we still are. We're a transshipment port for all the coffee coming from Latin America, which is a majority of Arabica coffee. So it's so intertwined in both our economy and our culture here that growing up, it's hard to escape it. And, I remember going to my mom's a big coffee drinker. I remember going to the cafe as a kid and getting just the milk off her latte, as a little introduction taste. And then somewhere along the line as a young teenager, I think I was watching a show, it used to be on Travel Channel, called Dangerous Grounds, where a guy, Todd Carmichael, goes to, far-flung exotic locations around the world and tries to find the best coffee. And it clicked in my head like coffee is more than just a drink. This is a product that's produced by millions and millions of people around the world and in so many different places. And there's a lot of potential there to, uplift communities through coffee production. And so I started really focusing on all the different origins and the flavors that you could get. And I became a bit of like a coffee freak. I was obsessed with new coffees that I could bring in from Ethiopia or Brazil or Guatemala and taste them. And, I did science experiments in high school on coffee. And then I started working in coffee. I started at a cafe as soon as I was allowed to work here in New Orleans. And then from there, I kept working in the coffee industry, working with roasteries. I helped bring back a small coffee shop at the University of Miami's campus, a student-run coffee shop at that time. But something was still missing. It was the production aspect, and I wanted to see how I could get involved in the agriculture, the export, the whole economics of coffee as a multi-billion-dollar industry. Because again, coffee is a product with so much potential to uplift people's lives, but unfortunately, the history of coffee has been exploitative and extractive, but it doesn't need to be that way. And so now, with the rise of specialty coffee and the interest in the quality and the origin of where coffee from, we have an opportunity to change that narrative going forward. And this project fits into that broader uh, uh, approach that we see happening in the specialty coffee industry now.
All right, so let's give folks a little history of coffee, because as I said, sometimes we take stuff for granted. Because we grew up around coffee, we just take it for granted. It's like cocoa. We grew up drinking cocoa tea every morning, and now we hear of all the health benefits of it. And because we grew up drinking it, we neglected it. And I don't think we have centenarians being new centenarians being produced as we did before. But let's talk about coffee. You said you studied coffee. So where in the world did people start drinking coffee? Why did they start drinking it? And let's talk about the evolution, eventually getting it to Dominica.
Yeah, so coffee is a really interesting plant species. It's one of the few plant species that has caffeine. We still don't have a good reason of why plants ever developed caffeine, particularly coffee. Um, it is native primarily, the Coffea species family is native to Africa. Right now, when we talk about coffee, we're usually referring to Coffea arabica or Arabica coffee, which
Hmm.
is the species that's most commonly consumed. It's about 70% of the coffee market. That is originally from the cloud forest, the highlands of Ethiopia. Recent research says also potentially South Sudan. There's also Coffea robusta or robusta coffee, a little higher caffeine content, more robust, grows at lower elevations. That's more native to West Africa. And then you have other ones that are a little rare, Coffea liberica. That's was often referred to as Café Dominique from West Africa there, a taller tree species with bigger cherries. And then a whole bunch, 80 something other species that aren't really cultivated commercially for coffee to drink. But from Ethiopia, there's all sorts of stories about how Arabica coffee was found, myths at this point. The primary one is there's a shepherd and his goat. Kaldi was the shepherd's name. His goat wandered off, was eating the coffee berries, and he noticed the goat had a lot of energy. So he started picking them. And then the question is whether, monks threw it into fire because they said, we can't have this, or he started roasting it himself. But somewhere along the line, the people of Ethiopia discovered coffee. And then from Ethiopia, roasted coffee started spreading to places like Yemen, right? You think it's in the Middle East, but it's just a skip over the Red Sea. And it became a big part of Sufi Islam culture, right? The ability to stay up and drink coffee all night and study became a big piece. And then from the Arabian Peninsula, it started spreading toward India. There's a whole story of a monk sneaking seeds to India over there, from there to Turkey. And then really from Turkey, you start seeing it spread into Europe, into the European coffee houses at the time. But it wasn't until the colonization of the New World that coffee took off as a major crop. And from there, it was brought from the French, I believe, to the island of Réunion in the Indian Ocean, and then from there to Martinique. And so the first coffee in the Caribbean and New World came through Martinique, actually. And then from the records that we have, likely entered into Dominica via Martinique, from actually the first, I just found this information out doing research. The first technically colonizer of Dominica, Jeannot Rollet, in Grand Bay,
Mhm.
an African-born man actually established a coffee plantation, a coffee estate in the south of the island there, working with Kalinago chiefs who were in the area as well. So coffee arrived very early in Dominica. We're talking about
No.
like the 1600s, and was one of the first places in what we consider the New World, the Americas, to cultivate coffee. So coffee has quite the journey from Ethiopia to Dominica there.
So there's no doubt coffee is African,
Exactly. The coffee
right?
that we drink,
The coffee that
Coffee
we drink is yeah.
Arabica, yeah, it comes from East Africa without a doubt. We have genetic tracing to that.
Right. And so the it became popular because of the association you give in your energy and being able to stay up longer, shepherds in the field being alert, monks, students studying, and so on. And during colonization, coffee production became one of the cash crops. But subsequent to that, there were diseases, and of course, because the trees were taller, more susceptible to hurricanes. So let us talk a little bit about the challenges that those early planters of coffee faced, and maybe translate them into our more current times if we're seeing some of those same challenges to coffee growers in Dominica.
And you hit exactly. This is my current research. I'm a graduate student at Tulane University right now, and I just finished a paper about the demise of coffee in the mid 19th century in
Oh
Dominica.
wow. Mm.
And there's a lot of reasons, and I think they vary. So using the resources that we have from the colonial times, we can pinpoint it to a few things. So the primary reason that they gave at the time was what they called the coffee blight. They said it came from some sort of moth, and it really wrecked the coffee industry. It destroyed a lot of crops. Now, what we have from other information from researchers came from Trinidad afterward, they said that that blight was actually, you could deal with it. If you smoked out your field, it would kill the moth and the blight would go away. So that probably had a small role into it. Other things that were happening at the same time, though, was that first of all, you had a lot of deforestation going on when more planters were moving, cutting down forests that adjutted their land. So then during that time, the winds that would come down, as you mentioned, hurricanes would be harsher. There was less pollination. It impacted the coffee crop. There was also a loss of traditional knowledge of how to plant coffee. This is something we're trying to bring back to the modern day, is interplanting other tree species, especially native tree species like poidu. If you remember, like the sweet
I
ice
remember
cream
Pado.
now.
Hmm.
You used to plant that. You would read in these old books, plant the poidu between your trees. With modern science, we know that it's a nitrogen fixing tree. It assists the soil and the fertilization process of the coffee plant. It provides windbreak for the coffee there. It provides shade for the coffee. Remember, coffee is a shade loving plant. It thrives in the cloud forest of Ethiopia. So it wants to be under shade for both quality and health of the coffee plant itself. But some of that was being lost at that time. There was also a shift toward sugar cultivation, right? Sugar became king across the Caribbean. Dominica topographically was never meant for sugar. Sugar likes to grow in kind of flat expanses. Anybody
Right.
who's been to Dominica would know that there's not much of that outside of maybe cane field, which there's a reason for the name. Sugar isn't a perfect crop for it, but you have records of farmers uprooting their coffee and planting sugar in the mountains where it doesn't grow in the same area.
Right. And then too much rain as well dilutes the sugar content in sugarcane, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then really, when we talk about the social impact of it, the blight happened just around the same time as abolition occurred, right? It's today we have Juneteenth as a federal holiday in the US, which, celebrates and also understands the long history of enslavement in the US. But, prior to that, there was abolition of slavery in the English colonies at the time. So
Hmm.
you know coffee is a crop. It has so much background that goes into it, especially when we talk about like the brutal history of enslavement in Dominica there. um Traditionally was something that would employ is not the right word here, would utilize an entire family. So while younger, more fit people would be out harvesting the plants and pruning and taking care of the fields, older people and children would be there pulping the coffee and drying it. So it had a whole workforce surrounding it. But what my research has pointed to is that it's not just abolition, because remember, after abolition, people still would work the land and would start to buy their own lands. The history of family land and the pride that formerly enslaved, now freed people had in cultivating their own lands is entrenched in Dominican culture. But it also was a movement away from the mountains toward the coast. So you had a mass movement of populations post abolition toward what they call the Three Crowns area, the thin line around the coast, which is why so many villages now kind of dot the coast so close to the area there. It was originally crown land, and then people flocked to that area for free land once they wanted to flee their places of bondage. So it was a whole wide variety of reasons why coffee slowly demised over time. After a bit of that, there was potential seen, and we've seen throughout Dominican history multiple attempts to revive the coffee industry there. The issue, though, was that Dominica could never compete on the international stage, right? As a small island, the quantity just wasn't there to compete with places like Brazil, Vietnam, India, Costa Rica, Mexico, like large nations with lots of coffee. And so there never was the ability to reach that level again. It was more kind of specialty consumption, more for local consumption, maybe selling to hucksters or other islands around. What we have now, though, is a different economic landscape for coffee with the rise of the specialty coffee industry, with the rise of an industry that focuses on quality over quantity. And this is why, current efforts at reviving the coffee industry have a very different approach, a very different tact, where you understand that you don't need mass quantity to compete on the international market. You need to sell a different story of quality, a story of, the history of
The
Dominican
history,
coffee,
the heritage. Yeah.
rarity of it. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
that's what gets people to buy it. And I always, do the simple math of if you're selling 100 pounds of coffee for $1 a pound, you get $100 back. But if you sell 10 pounds of coffee for $10 a pound, that's 100 there. Or if you sell 20 pounds for $10, all of a sudden you get more.
You
So
get more.
you can focus on the quality over quantity here. There's mass potential, and this fits into the other economic shifts that are going on in the region with the rise of tourism in Dominica, and the shifts toward people caring about where they get their food and drink beverage products from now as well. So we're in a different scenario where we're focusing on that specialty market and assisting farmers in accessing those markets.
I have a question, and I'm not sure if you have the answer because you study coffee, and this question is about tea. Um, why do you think that coffee made it to our part of the world and not tea, where, I know the caffeine level might be a little bit lower in tea, but in terms of the type of trees, in terms of the growing conditions, there's some islands maybe where tea might be suited. Is that a correct statement? But tea that doesn't seem to have made it. We have herb teas, but tea as in do you have you ever thought have you had the opportunity to think about that? Do you have any theories on that?
Yeah, I was just having this conversation yesterday, actually, when we talked about it. I think that a lot of it had to do with the economics of it at the time. Tea cultivation was something that has such a long history, especially in East and Southern Asia. So you have large tea fields in India, China, Japan, even Sri Lanka, which
Hmm.
used to be a coffee cultivating country. I think Sri Lanka, they used to call it Ceylon, is an interesting history. It's another island. It's an
Yeah.
island that used to be a major producer of coffee for the British Empire. It also experienced a blight, but instead of bringing back coffee, what they did is actually cut down all the coffee and replaced it with
And
tea. And
tea,
that's why
right?
we hear Ceylon tea has
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
name now because of that there. Why it didn't get to the Caribbean, I think, could just be because it was cheaper to produce in, areas of India and things like that. It could also just be a taste profile, even going back to the American Revolution, the Boston Tea Party in part was because Americans were drinking more coffee. So they were
You're dumping the tea.
connecting tea that way. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, a lot when you think about what we call the contingencies of history, how things have changed over time historically, so much comes down to these, seemingly small factors of British colonial economic decision making and how that impacted the modern day. I think the strongest argument for why tea is not as big is because it was already big in Asia, so it could
Hmm.
stay
They,
there and be economically viable. But the British do like their tea,
they like
and
the
I know
tea.
that for
And
a fact. So I always wonder why it never made it to the English, colonized Caribbean spaces as
I
well.
think that maybe because we were predominantly African and coffee is African, probably taste profile might and be better suited to our taste. Anyway, that was just a curiosity question right there. We are right at the halfway mark of the hour. So I'm going to take a quick break, get a word from our sponsors. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Dominican Coffee Revitalization Initiative, of which you are the executive director, the work that you all are doing. We're going to talk about the first International Coffee Day that's going to be hosted in Dominica, and we're going to be talking about the excited plans to grow the industry even further. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. My guest tonight is Mr. Ezra Remer. He's the executive director of the Dominican Coffee Revitalization Initiative, and he's teaching us about Dominica, about that aspect of Dominica that we seem to have lost, or at least have pushed back a little bit because economics push bananas and citrus and other economically beneficial crop to the forefront. But can coffee make a comeback in Dominica? Can we really truly revitalize the coffee industry in Dominica? Uh, and what would that look like? So stay tuned and we'll be right back.
Present, presented by.
People say I've got a great smile. Well, I have to say, this is all thanks to the professional team at Beacon Dental Group right here in Dorchester, Massachusetts. I've got world-class dental care. Beacon Dental Group has expert and caring staff dedicated to providing the most advanced and satisfactory treatment in all aspects of oral health. Their services are designed to meet your needs and give you a perfect smile, too. General checkups, cosmetic surgery, Gemini laser service, and advanced procedures, all in a state-of-the-art facility. Call or visit Beacon Dental Group today, 1026 Blue Hill Avenue, Dorchester, Massachusetts, or call 617-282-2146 for a smile that lights the world.
How much Dominican history do you know? Want to learn some fun facts? We have a great and fun way to test your knowledge and learn more about our history. Get your copy of Dominic Anu, Dominica in Puzzle. Fun for the whole family. Available now on Amazon.com. Visit pushpast10.com to learn more. Email us at dominicainpuzzle@gmail.com or call 877-698-9894. Looking to promote your business, engage current customers, and reach new people? Well, look no further. From the basic presentation to a fully fledged advertisement, use your video ads to attract customers. At Man's Audiovisual Productions, we do just that. We produce videos for business and event promotions, product demo videos, animated explainer videos, fundraiser ads, and much, much more. Engage your clients and sell online. We customize the video to match your brand design. Guaranteed to play flawless on all devices, including smart TVs. Contact us at telephone number 203-690-4342 or 767-245-6238. Visit our website, mansaudiovisual.com, or email us at derekvideo@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back. Welcome back, folks. Thanks for staying through the break. Let me just acknowledge a few people. If you make a comment, I will see where you are. So if you're on and I don't mention you, is because you haven't made a comment. Alvin, welcome. Push past 10, Dr. Simon Matthew. Uh, of course, as Don Corriett is there. Don, it's been a while. Good to see that you're doing well. My sister Maslin Edwards, Owen Prosper is a regular every single Wednesday night for the last, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Owen Prosper is always on it this week in interview. Um, Dr. Sam Christian, Dr. Sam and I have been interacting for quite a few years now. And 2 weekends ago, he made it to the Dominican Diaspora Art and Craft that was hosted by Miss Maslin Edwards. So I finally got to meet Dr. Sam Christian in person. It was a pleasure, Dr. Sam. I met quite a few other people there. That was quite, an activity that Maslin put on. Uh, Kyle Coffey, my old grammar school, not classmate. He was a couple years ahead of me, but I remember him from grammar school. Adelaide Paul was also at the expo. Decade products. She has some really tremendous sauces and different condiments that she really popular and makes quite a difference in your recipes. Adelaide Paul, Mary Laurie as well is a long time listener and viewer. It's a Derek Mann from Man Audio Visuals. He does our flyers and he can do that for your businesses as well. So, folks, thank you for tuning in. And we're having a very interesting conversation tonight with Mr. Ezra Remer. He is the executive director of the Dominica Coffee Revitalization Initiative. And he was explaining to us how he learned about Dominica through his step grandmother, who was a travel journalist. And she was in love with Dominica, and she passed on that affection to him. And so after Hurricane Maria, he decided that was then that he needed to visit Dominica and see how he could make a difference. And he, being passionate about coffee, saw the opportunity to assist Dominica in the recovery from the devastation of Hurricane Maria. And so he started doing some work. He's going to tell us about it. Father Coffee, made the connection when we decided that we needed to have him on the program. So he'll tell us what that relationship is as well, and who are the other Dominicans that he's working with, uh, in farmers and otherwise, and let's just get a feel for, will we will we see a robust coffee industry. So I'm going to start this conversation by going back to something that you said earlier, where you say that Dominica cannot compete on volume, but we can compete on, I want to say branding, but really producing a product that's more than just something you sip in a cup that gives you caffeine. And so talk to us about that concept, and you can intertwine it with the whole goals of the Dominica Coffee Revitalization Initiative.
For sure, definitely.
Mhm.
Coffee has seen massive shifts in the past few years. We talk about the waves of coffee, the first wave being access to coffee, people drinking it regularly. The second wave being the promotion of, quality coffee with the Starbucks and those other companies. Now we're in a third wave of coffee, which is the specialty coffee and the rise of specialty coffee. People seeking something different when it comes to quality and the flavors of coffee, right? Coffee is such a unique drink because it can contain so many different flavors within one cup. We think of coffee as a flavor in itself, but there's fruity notes, floral notes, chocolatey, everything under the sun you can think of. I have cupping wheels where we go through and we taste different coffees and see what's in there. So in the specialty wave right now, there's an opportunity for people who want coffee that tastes different from other places and has a different story, a different background from other places. And most people, when I talk about working in Dominica and my experiences here, the first question I get is, are you in the Dominican Republic? Well, first, then I have to explain what Dominica is. And that gives me the opportunity to say, no, Dominica is an independent nation between Martinique and Guadeloupe in the Eastern Caribbean. It's the nature island of the Caribbean. It's home to the most active volcanoes of anywhere in the world. It's home to the most fertile soils and lush rainforests of the entire Caribbean and possibly the world there. And then that connects that story that people have to the product of coffee there as well. And we've seen that the fertile soils, those volcanic soils that people often talk about of why Dominica is so lush, have translated into the quality of the coffee produced in Dominica. And so over the past few years, the work of our project has been multifold, but one of those things is assessing the quality of Dominican coffee that's already on the island there. So what we did is we constructed a coffee drying facility up in the mountains of Mondiablotin Syndicate area, just up the road from Dublin on the west coast there. I harvested myself. I pulped coffee. I dried it. We took it back to roast, and then we did a quality assessment, and it blew me out of the water. We had a licensed Q grader, like a sommelier for coffee, conduct the analysis. The threshold score wise for quality coffee, specialty coffee, is at 80. And we scored some of these coffees into 86.5, which is
Wow.
on par with some of the best coffees of the world. Another lovely anecdote I like to tell is I was recently working on a small luxury cruise line. We had a coffee cupping with the guest. I laid out 4 different coffees from the Caribbean that were all roasted at the same time, from Haiti, Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, and Dominica. And then we did a blind taste test, and people chose their favorite. I think every single person there chose Dominican coffee, even above Jamaican Blue Mountain, even above really
Mm.
quality coffees from
Wow,
Haiti
wow, wow.
and the DR. And so we've already established that this is quality coffee. But then also, what plays into is the passion that some of the farmers have for cultivating their coffee. As I mentioned earlier, coffee is a shade loving plant. It thrives under forest cover. So the basic idea of this project was to uh, revitalize the economic, right, by providing higher incomes for coffee farmers through specialty coffee, and the ecological landscape of the island by planting more native forest cover to shade the coffee. So by doing so, you have so many benefits, not just for the quality of the coffee and the health of the coffee plant itself, but for the wider forest and ecological health as well, where the soil is stabilized. There's less land erosion, landslides that come through. There's windbreak during hurricanes. The native flora and fauna, right? The the Jocko parrots, I hear them in Syndicate constantly squabbling above in the trees there, but we can provide more trees for them to live in, and there's a multitude of ecological effects that I could go on for hours and hours about. And then the last piece is the social and cultural aspect. And we discussed briefly about how important coffee is in Dominican heritage and culture. And unfortunately, that's been eroding away a bit over time as coffee becomes more imported than grown at home and processed at home. But bringing back that pride of Dominican coffee is something special. It's something unique to the culture. And there's farmers who work so hard to cultivate that. And I think it's a good opportunity now to shout out some of the farmers who we work with primarily in the Syndicate
Definitely.
area. I've worked with, first I met with Earl LaRoque down in the Milton area, then Clement Charles from the Jublan village, and talking with farmers.
We seem to be having a little bit of a your audio starting to squabble a little bit, and this is the most important. This is one of the most important parts where I let me ask Sam if it's just me or do we have that quality issue. Yeah, Ezra, he seemed to have been frozen, and I really wanted the way he's starting to recognize. Are we back? Are we better? Yeah. Okay, you just
Are we
froze
good
for a
now?
minute. Yeah, it seems like we're good. So let's talk about the name of the farmers again. You were mentioning the farmers. I really didn't want that to get lost.
I appreciate that because that's what's most important to me. What I was
Yeah.
saying is that, the greatest education I've had in Dominica has been spending time with the farmers out in their fields. Particularly, our focus has been in the Syndicate and Milton areas there. And from the beginning of the initiative, we set out in that area seeking to hear from farmers and listen to their experiences. So, farmers from down Syndicate, I'm thinking driving the road up, if anybody's ever been up the farm feeder road to Syndicate there, or LaRoque at the bottom, you have Clement Charles and his son Darwin, who I met recently, pillars in the Dublin community. You have Whitnell Louis, who's a name that's may be familiar to many people. He's about to turn
Oh yes,
92
Mr. Farmer.
September. He's Mr. Farmer. I have spent countless hours. I was just on his farm a few days ago harvesting pineapples with him, listening to him. I have hours and hours of interviews that we conducted, getting his history and the stories he has to tell. He's a font of knowledge. He's an inspiration to me personally. In fact, we recently co-wrote a research paper together using his knowledge and research that I compiled to elevate the farmer experiences that they've had throughout their lives. Josepha Charles and her whole family, who has now come back from England to work J&V Farms there. They're a big producer of coffee, and she is just a force to be reckoned with there. And then there's some newer farmers in the area too. I've been focusing a lot on youth participation in agriculture. And so Free Up Farm, right next to Josepha Charles's farm up in Syndicate there, is doing really amazing things with permaculture farming, natural organic farming up in that area as well. And then beyond there, I've had the pleasure of meeting not just coffee farmers, but farmers from all other crops. There's Cocoa Valley Farms, which is in Concord there. I met with Vaughn Green at Soma Farms in Concord. There's so much momentum that's coming up now of younger people getting involved, and particularly in the organic and permaculture spaces as well. So from the devastation of Maria, and that's where we often start off with, the darkest period there's been this rebirth of agriculture, and coffee fits so perfectly in there, both from connecting the generation of farmers who have had such long experiences up to 92 years old in Whitnell Louis' case, all the way through to younger farmers like Free Up Farm there too. So it really has been an inspiration to me, and I've learned so much. I just spent 2 weeks collecting interviews with farmers of all ages, trying to understand how agriculture is passed down through generations. And some of the stories I heard, the strength and passion of these farmers is something that I could have never dreamed of. I'll go back to Josepha Charles' story she told me at 70, this was 75 years old. after the hurricane, when the roads were, mashed up from the storm, she carried a load up, I don't know, it's about 3 miles straight up, something like 2,000 feet up a winding
Wow.
road, multiple times back and forth to care for her land, to care for the animals there. And this is coming from someone in my position. I tried walking that road and I quickly took a ride, and so this has just been the history of farming in Dominica, and Dominicans particularly, is this passion and care for the land. There's a reason why the national motto is "Après bon Dieu c'est la terre," after God is the land, because there's this care for that. And coffee features so prominently in bringing back the conception of Dominica is a special place, not just because the land provides, but because the people take care of the land, and can enjoy, all of the bounty that provides.
I can tell you from experience, farming in Dominica demands you to step up and tie your waist, as we say. There are no easy farms in Dominica. There are no easy farms. Dr. Christian is saying right now, at this moment, I'm enjoying a cup of Cafe Gourmet produced in Salisbury. Are you familiar with the brand Cafe Gourmet?
I just saw over the break a notification from the person who runs it. So if you're listening in right now, I'll be
Feel free
reaching
to
out as
shout
soon as
out
we get out the
if you know
interview.
the person. Yeah.
This is the beauty of interviews like this, and having platforms to speak about it is, I'll go around island and just keep talking to everybody, but you get put on from one person who has a connection to this person, and whether it's family or friends, you end up meeting so many new people. So I'm so excited for any initiatives that people are taking to bring back coffee as a component of Dominican agriculture, economics, culture there. Our nonprofit is here to support in whatever capacity we can, and we're committed to that. And there are, multiple producers, small roasters on the island, who I've worked with. Café Monaco is a recent one in Pébouche. There's Café La Ville. There's Café Local, smaller roasters on the island who are doing their own thing because the demand's there. I mean, a lot of these roasters are getting bought out completely because when tourists especially come to the island, they want something unique to bring back. And
Right.
Dominican coffee is one of the most unique things you can have. So the demand is there. Right now, it's just about improving the supply and the infrastructure required for that supply. And then the quality through the shade methods, agroforestry, as we call it, that we've discussed before too. So that's been our primary work, is really building up the knowledge and infrastructure on the island in whatever capacity we can to support the farmers, so the farmers can get more income that they deserve for the quality product that they produce and work so hard for.
And the effort it takes. There's somebody on the chat, Miss Susan George. She's from the Grand Fond area. When I before I left Dominica, she used to bring me coffee in a brown paper bag, like a pound of coffee. And Grand Fond is at a pretty high elevation. That coffee was really magnificent coffee. So shout out. I don't know if you've dealt with any of the farmers in Grand Fond. I don't know what the conditions of the trees are. Grand Fond is right above Rosalie. So if you stay in
Mhm.
Rosalie, I don't know if you had the opportunity to talk to any one of them in Grandford, but you should check it out and see if there are farmers there because they're at a pretty high elevation, right in the at the foot of the freshwater lake. Um, is Grandford. So let's talk about the non-profit Dominica Coffee Revitalization Initiative, and take the opportunity to talk about Coffee Day as well. But what exactly is the Dominica Coffee Revitalization Institute? What are the work you guys are doing? What are your next steps? Let's say.
Yeah, so we're a 501(c)(3) nonprofit. So that just means, for American IRS terms, that we are a certified nonprofit. We don't have political, motivations or ambitions. It's solely a charity organization here. And so our mission is just to assist the farmers of Dominica in revitalizing the coffee industry to provide economic, ecological, and social benefits to the farmers and the greater population of Dominica itself. And so we spent a good bit of time researching and assessing the landscape of coffee cultivation on the island first. I read in a book, there's a great line that said, the history of Dominica has been an island of latent potential. You hear so many people say Dominica has so much potential, but then people come in guns blazing with all these great ideas, of how we're going to make Dominica economically viable or whatever. It takes time and it takes effort to understand what people want and to listen to the ideas that Dominicans on the island and on the ground have. And so for the past 5, 6 years, that's been our primary purpose, is listening and then acting after. And so listening to farmers, we heard that there's issues with labor, and it required a lot of work to process the coffee, right? Coffee requires it to be harvested, which takes a lot of time. But then after that, you have to pulp the cherries, you have to dry the cherries, you have to hull the parchment off, and then you have to roast it. And that takes a lot more labor and time than people might anticipate from just, picking grapefruit off of the tree. So one thing that was lacking was the infrastructure to dry the coffee and process it. So as I said, we built a solar coffee dryer up in Syndicate. And so through that area, we're modeling right now for a larger facility that we intend to construct, where we can dry coffee at a high quality and at limited labor for the farmers there. Additionally, there's the issue of how to cultivate coffee so it's healthy in the most practical ways. That requires a lot of shade and requires bringing back a lot of the knowledge that was previously instilled by former generations. We talked about the poidu tree, but there's many other trees that serve as nitrogen fixers and are native to the island. Things like Bois motel, things like glory cedar, and coffee can also be grown underneath, other high value fruit producing trees, mango, avocado, pear, tonka, the list goes on. And so it's a lot about assisting farmers with planting schemes. And our eventual aims are to actually bring in some high quality hybrid varieties that are resistant to other diseases, resistant to climate change, and then most importantly, have higher yields for farmers and higher quality. So providing farmers with both the coffee plants itself from the nursery, but then also the trees to plant alongside it. And then the last piece is building up what we talked about, that marketing, the brand for Dominican coffee there, and accessing a global market. Originally the plan for this project was how can we access export markets and get the highest price for farmers. With the recent rise of tourism in Dominica, it's clear that the demand is so high from both locals and tourists alike that that's going to make up a bigger percentage of the product. But then that requires building up, cafes of specialty coffee in Dominica, assisting roasters in Dominica to help them with the roasting process so that they can better, roast the coffee to a higher quality for people who want to buy bags. And in that way, it passes down the price to the farmer as well. So the end goal is really getting more money in the farmer's hands and everybody involved in the, agronomic and agro-processing supply chain so that we can continue the cultivation of coffee and then reintroduce, I wouldn't even say introduce, but rebirth, bring back, revitalize more sustainable methods for coffee cultivation. And then through those efforts, it helps stabilize the environmental landscape of the island so that coffee can not just be something that doesn't continue to harm the nature of the nature island, but rather bring back and revitalize and increase the forest cover of the island itself. Coffee is really, like, I call it a blessed crop, because how many crops don't need full sun and would actually rather shade? That's
Right.
really a
You don't
blessing.
have to clear the land to plant coffee. It's the opposite. You leave the shade in place.
Exactly, and you can get multiple levels of
Mhm.
farming done that way. It's really crazy that you can think about tree crops where you can have a fruit and then still grow coffee underneath. And so it's something that's both economically and environmentally beneficial for farmers. There just needs to be, a clear plan of action, and for
Right.
farmers to understand that this isn't just possible, but this is something that's beneficial in the long run. And the blessing is that Dominican farmers are some of the smartest people I've ever met, and when they see these things in action, it clicks. And so just being back on the island over the past few weeks, I've had so many farmers come to me and say, I just planted 500 coffee plants in my field. I just planted more shade for the coffee. I just pruned my field of coffee to bring it back. And so when they see that there's the demand growing, there's a shift and really a want and a passion to get back into coffee. And our only job here is to do what we can to assist farmers how they need to be assisted. And that includes people involved throughout the, agriculture supply chain as well.
No, I fully support you when you say that Dominica has really, really smart farmers. I go back to the days when we were doing bananas, And it had gotten to the point where the farmers, and you see how Dominica is rugged. The farmers in Dominica used to produce bananas of a quality and be able to take it to where it's being collected to go to the ports, through dunghills, through rivers, over rocks. And it would be of a quality where when it gets to the supermarkets in the UK, there was nothing to do but to remove the cover and place it on the shelf, you know? And I don't know if you're familiar with bananas, but your nails can nick the skin of the banana, and that cures into a blemish. And those are rejected. And the farmer is able to, in the heights of Syndicate, in the heights of all of these other mountains, get bananas to that quality that could come straight from under the banana field. And the next time somebody sees that banana, it's on a shelf in the high end supermarkets in the UK. So you're definitely going to something when you say that we have some of the smartest farmers, some of the most trainable farmers. And also a lot of that training was done by extension officers. So we also have a history of having support staff that can produce that support for farmers. So I'm extremely encouraged by the approach that you're taking towards bringing that kind of personal high value farming back to us, and it's not now where the coffee is getting put in a bag and sent somewhere. It's where now the coffee is being harvested and being processed so that the farmer can benefit from that value add of being processed. uh, you spoke about when you were talking about the varieties of coffee, and you say that there is the Arabica coffee that is like 70%, and then the Robusta, and then there's that third one that we know as Cafe Dominica, that Cafe Dominique, that we all have that nostalgic taste. And every time you sip some coffee from some, I go to the specialty coffee shops in New York, um, not Starbucks, not Dunkin' Donuts. I go to these shops where you pick your beans and they grind it for you, and I'm always hopeful that I'm going to taste one of those coffees and it's going to bring back in my memory. That's the coffee I remember when I was growing up. And that has never happened. And you're saying that's because that coffee is rare. It may not be the best variety for commercial enterprise, right? That's what I'm getting. But can you talk about that? I'm sure the audiences would be interested in that because they too most likely have that memory of that Dominican coffee taste that is just difficult to reproduce.
Yeah, so that coffee is, the scientific name is Coffea liberica. It's just called liberica coffee. It's known as the tree of coffee. It grows much taller, right? Arabica tree coffee bushes more so rarely grow above 10 feet, but liberica can get really tall, and they have those big cherries on there as well. It comes from West Africa. It's mostly cultivated now in Southeast Asia, but it only comprises about 2% of the global market. It's a little lower in caffeine. It's a little harder to process, and the machinery for processing coffee aren't necessarily made for those big cherries. You know, you have the smaller
Okay.
cherries of
Mm,
Arabica. Actually, today I had the experience of doing a quality assessment of the Liberica, of the Cafe Dominique, a new roaster in Pebush that I mentioned, Cafe Monaco. They had harvested and processed and then roasted the Liberica coffee, and I brought some back with me. And it has a different flavor. You're correct. Our quality assessment grader was like, "This is different. I don't know what's going on here, but this is different." And it has this like roasty, rich flavor, a little like spiciness to it, almost like black pepper pungentness. And then it has like what you hear oftentimes is a jackfruit, a durian, like a very tropical fruit taste as well in the
right.
background. So it
Hmm.
does taste different. It's much more disease resistant. It can grow much better at lower elevations than Arabica. It's more robust in that way. Um, and it's something that I've always had on our vision, is bringing this to the specialty market, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for it. But when you talk about the nostalgia that it brings back of the Cafe Dominique, I hear that from so many, especially, middle-aged and older Dominicans who had that experience growing up. And so I think there's a lot of potential for that as well. And it allows farmers in lower elevation areas to access the coffee market too, because Arabica really grows best above 1,500 feet, 500 meters or so, and a lot of farmlands in Dominica are below that level. Arabica is really picky when it comes to the climatic conditions. It wants it to
Mm,
be cooler at night, but not too cold. It wants to be warm during the day, but not too warm. It wants rain, but not too much rain. And so Dominica, luckily, in a lot of areas, as we say, syndicate has those conditions, but not everywhere on the island because there's a
right.
lot of low-lying areas. So Liberica Cafe Dominique is an opportunity to open that up, and it requires a little bit of a different approach. But right now, the research that we're doing is how can we better approach Liberica as a specialty crop and something that can, be introduced back as a specialty product in Dominica and then across the world as well, because it does set Dominica apart in that way too, right? The history of Liberica being brought in after the blight, the history of Cafe Dominique, the history of Ma Cafe that kids would have as a child. There's such a rich legacy to that and a story to be told. And so much of the specialty coffee market is just telling that story. And so there's a lot of opportunity there, and it's definitely an avenue that we're pursuing in the coming years. It's an
I
area
look
that
forward to that. I raise my hands to experiencing that taste one more time. Julie Polida is saying that she needs to start bringing back coffee to the US when she travels to Dominica. Absolutely, Julie. I don't know why you don't, because I get coffee sent up to me from Dominica, even if I don't go. She says great initiative as well. Veronica Pascal says very interesting program. Thanks, Veronica, for that. Alvin was asking a question: if the soil, the water, the volcanic nature, what about Dominica? You think that makes our coffee stand out? The way you've described that it stands out.
Yeah, that's such a hard question because there's so much going on there. I think
Mm,
it's the same reason why so much of the agricultural products from Dominica are of such high quality. Dominica is the newest island of the Caribbean geologically, so the soils are the freshest from volcanic. So they're very rich when we do our soil tests in nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, micronutrients like that. So scientifically, Dominican soils are some of the most fertile in the region. There's plenty rain to go around. Dominica has no shortage of water, and rivers for that as well. And then because of the elevation, as I said, it gets a little cooler at night, so that allows for coffee to increase in its quality as well. So, something that's really interesting is the same elevations that you see in Dominica produce high quality coffee at, let's say, 1,500 feet above sea level is almost the same as coffee in Guatemala or Mexico that's at 4,000 feet above sea level because of the
wow.
microclimate of the
Mhm.
island. So Dominica has a lot of unique climatic, topographical, and soil structure that allows for the cultivation of not just coffee at a high quality, but so many fruits that you don't know how good a mango is until you have a
Until you've
Dominican
had
mango.
Dominican mango, right?
How good a
Uh,
sweet stuff is. So you had Dominican cockle, everything, the list goes on. And then at the end, a lot of it comes down to the farmer as well. And when you have a passionate farmer who takes good care of their land, that's really irreplaceable too. So, we could go on a long list about all the things that impact the quality of Dominican products, but coffee is just one of many products in Dominica that's of a high quality. But it's time for the world to realize that as well.
Yeah, I don't know how well your Creole is, but we have a traditional song that says Dominic do con sirop, sirop being syrup. And if you say you don't like Dominica, you've never had syrup. And all of these other nice things that they talk about Dominica. So you kind of harken back to that sort of realization that there's something particular and something special about Dominica. Now, in terms of the processing, I know you spoke about the drying. Uh, the roasting, I think, I imagine, is also extremely important. Like when we were growing up, we just used to roast our coffee on wood fires. And of course, your parents would train you not to burn the coffee. It looks like all coffee is burnt, but they would somehow they would tell you how long the coffee is on for and that you don't burn the coffee. Um, but strange enough, you would go different places in Dominica. If you go to somebody's home and you're there in the early morning or whether they give you a cup of coffee, it would taste the same. You know, but in an environment where you're trying to develop an industry, I imagine that some of those quality control issues come into effect where you need to know what temperatures you roast in the coffee and how long it stays and all of those things. Just in terms of for folks who are interested in that aspect of it, can you talk about that technical aspect of processing coffee a bit?
Definitely, yeah. So, the final stage of the coffee processing is the roasting. People forget how much work goes into drying the coffee, pulping, pulling it. Once it's ready to be roasted, as they call green beans, it's a relatively quick process, somewhere from 8 to 20 minutes
Mhm.
for the roasting of the coffee. Now, the coal pot was the old way to do it. You had to make sure you were constantly stirring, right? So,
Mhm.
no individual bean would be more roasted than the other. Now we have, modern technology, either gas powered or electric roasters, many of which you can actually plug in your roast profile into the computer and they can repeat the same roast time after time.
Wow.
So that allows for quality control as well. And then there's also preference there. It's something that, when I came to Dominica and I noticed all the coffee was so dark, I realized that that's the preference, because it probably comes from the coal pot days, that's what people are nostalgic for. The specialty coffee market lends toward a lighter and medium roast because you taste more of what they call the origin characteristics,
Right.
what makes each coffee unique. And so when we roast the coffee for analysis, we do it toward that level. But it really is, there's, such a spectrum and a range of where coffee can be roasted according to individual preferences that way. When we talk about how quality differs in Dominican coffee, something that struck me is now I have, 3 years of harvest and from different roasters throughout. In the same quality characteristics, the same notes are prevalent throughout all of those years in all of those different roasts. So it demonstrates that Dominican coffee has very specific characteristics, things like baker's chocolate, a very rich chocolatey, a very creamy body, something that,
Hmm.
doesn't have
Yeah.
too much acidity, something you hear about Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee having. Dominican coffee also has that very rich, creamy body without milk. It almost tastes like you have milk in there. And
That's
then
right.
some really interesting notes that we picked up of like cinnamon spice, grapefruit, a bit of citrus in there, a little bit of vanilla, all things that Dominica is known for producing actually are also elements of the tastes and flavors that you get in Dominican coffee. It's really an interesting coincidence, but it's something that you notice throughout all these coffees too, and sets Dominican coffee apart, which I find really unique. It's a really interesting factor that our research is revealing just now. In fact, today we did a cupping analysis and we got to see the same results pop up again.
Right. Because I guess that confirms what I'm saying, that I grew up in Castlebrus. We drink coffee in Castlebrus, but we would visit family in Dalis, or we'd go to Roseau, or we'd go to Point Michel, wherever, and you taste some coffee and it tastes pretty much the same. And that's why Dominicans have an idea of a Dominican coffee. um, and so it's interesting that you are actually scientifically identifying that. But I think there's also a bit of education that has to go into the public again, because you say that most people like that coffee, where a lot of folks believe that the, the stronger and darker the coffee is, the stronger it is. As opposed, I like light roast, because you still get the coffee taste, but it seems like it has more caffeine. And you it's almost like wine where you have all the different, you can get all the different tastes of coffee coming through because it has been roasted so much. What uh, how are you? How has been the response? I guess I want to ask about your interaction with the public at large, not necessarily the coffee farmers, but the population and their response to this whole Dominican coffee being a thing, um, another product of our modern Dominica.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of positive feedback. A concern that I hear a lot from not just farmers but the public at large is we need to bring more young people back into agriculture. And what is most encouraging to me is that there's a connection I find that a lot of young people, people my age, have to coffee. Oftentimes, people will travel to U.S., Canada, Europe, wherever, and then come back and be like, "I wish we had quality, that high quality cafe culture in
Hmm.
Dominica as well."
Hmm.
So there's
Hmm.
an
Hmm.
interest and a want for that. And when I talk about the social aspect of coffee, that features prominently as well. And so overall, the feedback's been really positive. You know, there are those who will be skeptical, and I think understandably so. Dominica has a long history, as I mentioned earlier, of people coming in with all these brilliant ideas to them and then not following through. So, one of the biggest things in this initiative that we're really focusing on is doing our research, doing our homework, and listening. My mom always told me you got two ears and one mouth for a reason. And I know I might have talked a lot on this interview here, but really the biggest thing that we can do is to listen to people, what they want, what their intentions are, how they think we can get there, and then bring all of those ideas together and be the force in terms of leveraging outside funding and interest and support in whatever way we can. So more than anything, we've received support, we've received a lot of interest, and then it's up to us now to follow through and do so in a way that does more good than anything else and is very measured and meaningful in the approaches we take. Because the last thing we want to do is have empty promises or let people down or, God forbid, make things worse. So we're really trying to bring together as many ideas and as many people as we can to push not just the agriculture forward, not just the economics and the markets of coffee forward, but really the culture of coffee in itself forward. And that's where, when we talk about International Coffee Day, it features so prominently into that as well.
Before we talk about International Coffee Day, I want to shout out to the folks who are tuning in to us on Dr. Simone's page, Push Past 10. I understand that we are live on that platform as well. So good night again, Dr. Simone Matthew. Thank you for that, and to the folks who are tuning in on that platform. It's good to have you. Let's talk about International Coffee Day. What is that about?
Yeah, so all the credit for this idea goes to Father Kofi. He approached me with this idea. The story he tells about his family's name and connection, it actually comes from coffee, from the original Kofi who moved, I believe, from French Guyana to Dominica there and maintained his name from his roots in Africa there. And so he was bringing together the Kofi Klatch to have a bit of a reunion and something to focus on there. And coffee came up as a prime area of interest. And so he had this idea of a international coffee, not just day, but a multi-day event that would
Hmm.
start out with the birthday of Mr. Whitney Louis, the farmer, the coffee farmer we discussed earlier, his 92nd birthday, I believe on
Wow.
September 27th, and continue through to September 29th, which is International Coffee Day. So
Mm.
the idea is that it will be a time for promoting coffee across Dominica, where businesses will have coffee available for their staff, employees, visitors, guests to drink, where the history of coffee in Dominica will be highlighted. I'm looking forward to giving a talk about the history of coffee across Dominica there. And it'll be when we talk about that revitalization, that uplifting of the pride and the heritage in Dominica and Dominican coffee. This will be a moment to really focus in, narrow in, and bring all that back and have the joy of coffee introduced again. So I'm really happy to be participating in this. I know there's a lot of the events will be hosted at Roots Ruins Bar and Roseau. And there's going to be events happening all across the island. Definitely something to stay tuned about. And we have some really exciting things planned there. And I'm, overjoyed from the inception of this project back in 2017, 2018 to now to be having an interview where we can talk about International Coffee Day in Dominica. It's something that really brings a lot of excitement, that there's a momentum that I feel, there's a push, there's real strong feelings from Dominicans both on island and in the diaspora that this is something that we can grasp, this is something we can celebrate together, and we can move coffee and Dominica forward in the upcoming years.
Yeah, so that's September 22nd to the 29th. Is that what you said?
I believe the 27th to the
20,
29th. Uh,
27th to the 29th. So it culminates on International Coffee Day.
exactly.
All right. So, I mean, I really want to say thank you to you and the other members of Dominica Coffee Revitalization Initiative. You, if you want to, you can also mention who are the other persons who are helping you with that. And you said the next steps are to expand the drying facility. And what are we doing? Introducing like micro roasters and just helping train folks on how to roast. How talk to us a little bit about how that would look if you end up with say 50 or 100 coffee significant coffee growers in Dominica.
Yeah, so the long-term plans is essentially establishing some form of a farmer cooperative, a centralized facility where farmers can receive plants, as I said, both coffee and tree plants from a nursery. And then once they cultivate their coffee, we'll assist them in the field, teaching them how to prune, or I guess, providing more knowledge on how to prune the
Mhm.
plants, how to harvest at the proper ripeness. And then farmers will be able to just bring their ripe cherries that they harvested that day to a central facility, a specialty coffee processing facility where the coffee will be pulped, dried for them at the highest quality standards in one area. So the nursery, drying facility, and then hopefully from there, roastery and cafe, and almost like a tourism center will all be one centralized unit where the farmers can collectivize their harvest and use the strength in numbers in order to reduce some of the work that it takes to process the coffee while still receiving, the highest price point for their pound of coffee there. So that's the long-term plan, is integrating a whole facility there. Our initiative, as I said, was co-founded by Mr. Michael Saverin. He is now our Dominican director and co-founder as well. Our American director, are we back?
I, uh-huh.
Okay.
I
Our
don't. Every time you start to talk about the folks that you collaborate with, it freezes. That's the funniest thing. But
Yeah, what a coincidence there.
yeah,
It's frozen on my end, but if you can still hear me, I'll keep
I can
going.
hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, our American director and filmmaker, Mr. Alex Muska, has been a crucial help in telling the story of Dominican farmers. And then you can find out much more about our initiative. You can watch the short documentary that we filmed. It's all at dominicacoffee.org, dominicacoffee.org.
DominicaCoffee.org. Mm-hmm.
That'll all be there. And feel free to reach out. We also are on Instagram at Dominica Coffee. Very easy to remember these things. And as I said, anybody who is interested, whether you're a farmer or a roaster or someone who just is interested in hearing more, always feel free to reach out. My line is open. Our contact information is on the website as well at dominicacoffee.org.
Yes, and so I want to say thank you so much for what you've done from since 2017, from getting that initiative and taking action. And I'm sure there were several points where you had to pivot and go in new directions. So that resilience and that perseverance, that dedication, commitment, all of those words. Thank you for that on behalf of the farmers that you were helping, and not just the farmers, the Dominicans and the folks who are on tonight. I'm sure I speak for them when I say we really appreciate what you are doing, and the vision that you were able to communicate to so many people in Dominica of what is possible. Didi Easter is saying thank you, Ezra Remer, for the opportunity given to the coffee farmers to cultivate their crops on a different level. And so, yeah, we echo that sentiment completely. And of course, from a personal point of view, and on behalf of the team, the TDN team, um, Sam and Ella, and of course, Father Coffee, who facilitated the introduction, I want to really say a good thank you to you, a great thank you to you, and to say that uh, we would like to have you back. TDN would definitely like to be involved in the publicity arm of the new developments, in the publicity arm of the International Coffee Day, coffee tasting, the education about coffee. Maybe we can have a Dominican coffee as part of the next diaspora art and craft expo that Maslin is putting on every summer, begin early summer in New Jersey. And there's so many things that we want to be involved with. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to close. There may be things that you wanted to say that we have not touched on. So you can feel free to say that. But I want to say thank you so much, and I give you the opportunity to make some closing remarks. Alvin, before you said Alvin, he said the website is dominicacoffee.org. Dominicacoffee.org. All right. So Ezra, your closing remark.
You got it. Yeah. So as I said, you can find out much more about our work at dominicacoffee.org. We're interested in hearing from anybody. Feel free to email us, WhatsApp, Instagram message, however you want to get involved. We're eager to hear from everybody else here. And it's been a pleasure to be on the show. I'm here anytime, any place, just name it, and I'll be back there. Because, at the end of the day, I appreciate all the gratitude, but it's my gratitude for the people of Dominica, whether it be on island or in the diaspora, and the farmers who I've just learned so much from. It's such a pleasure and a joy to be on island and immersed in that culture, and it feels like home at this point. And so for the hospitality, the gratitude, the graciousness of everybody who I've been involved with, it's been one of the joys of my life. And I look forward to, I'm a young guy now, and I look forward to spending a long time back in Dominica and seeing this project through to fruition. This is a personal passion of mine, and a passion for those involved in the initiative. And together, we look forward to seeing success in the future.
All right, awesome, and thank you for this great conversation tonight. I think everybody learned some things, and it just demonstrates that there is so much that we have to learn. Our How coffee is woven into our heritage as Dominicans, and of course, there's the sister or the parallel story with cocoa. Um, that we will explore because when we was growing up, the coffee tree was always next to the cocoa tree and that sort of thing. But tonight we're talking coffee. One of my loves, one of my passion, coffee. I drink coffee to the extent where it's not good enough. It's bad for me, and I don't put no sugar, no cream. I like coffee exactly how it is made, and I thank you for reviving that and for making it possible for us to teach our children about that part of our culture and that part of our heritage that we may have lost. So Ezra, I wish you all the best. Feel free to reach out to this medium if you need to get the word out to anything. And again, Father Coffee, thank you, and for the other folks who are working with you, we appreciate the effort. Good folks, there you have it. Another great conversation with Mr. Ezra Remer. And if you go onto his website, there's more information there. Dominicacoffee.org. Ezra, good evening.
Thank you. Have a great night. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night as well. Take care. Nobody, there's nobody who would say that tonight's episode wasn't a wonderful episode. Great conversation. Did you know so much about coffee? Yeah, folks like me who like to drink coffee, I learned from it tonight. So let's drop some stuff. Go to this week in interview, and just let me know what you think or what you thought about tonight's conversation. Go onto the Facebook page. This week in interview. Thank you, Julie, for saying great program. Alvin says thank you as well. Definitely, Alvin, we have to bring Ezra back on. Again, Dr. Matthew, thank you. Adelaide, all of you, Glenda Shillingford, um, thanks for being there. D Easter, um, Veronica Pascal, Derek of Man Audio Visual, uh, Simeon George, Dr. Christian, a lot of you guys were on there. So I really appreciate the lively interaction and the contributions of everybody. Thank you to the team, Sam and Ella, for a wonderful conversation. Good evening, everybody.